Every time it rains, your birds vanish. You just never asked why. You have watched it happen dozens of times without once stopping to question it. The sky darkens, the first drops fall, and the yard, which moments ago was alive with movement and sound, goes completely, utterly silent. Not one bird remains visible. It happens in seconds. And then, hours later, they return as if nothing occurred. But here is the number that should stop you cold. In a single moderate rainstorm lasting 6 hours, a small songbird like a house sparrow expends up to 40% of its daily energy budget simply staying warm and dry, 40%, before it has found a single seed. That number belongs to research from the Max Planck Institute for Ornithology, and it reframes everything. Because it means that where a bird goes during a storm is not a matter of comfort, it is a matter of survival mathematics. A wrong decision can end a life that has been building since spring. So what is actually happening? Stay with this, because it changes everything. If you have never subscribed to this channel, here is your reason. What you are about to learn about birds happens every rainstorm, in every yard, on every continent, and almost no one has ever been told the full story. Subscribe now. The next time it rains, you will watch differently. This channel exists for one purpose: to find the hidden layers inside the natural world that science has documented but popular culture has never reached. Every script here is built from peer-reviewed research, field observation, and institutional data. The goal is not to simplify nature, it is to restore its actual strangeness. There are no myths here, only precision. And the precision when it comes to birds in storms is stranger than any myth you were offered instead. The first and most obvious truth is this: birds seek structural shelter. When rain begins, most small passerines, sparrows, finches, warblers, titmice move immediately into dense vegetation. Not open branches, dense vegetation, thick hedgerows, the interior tangle of an evergreen, the sheltered underside of a broad-leafed canopy. The physics behind this choice is exact. A bird's feathers, when maintained in peak condition, trap a layer of warm air against the skin. This insulation works beautifully in dry conditions. Rain destroys it. Water penetrates the outer vein of a feather and collapses the microstructure, eliminating the trapped air layer and exposing the bird to conductive heat loss that can kill within hours. Dense vegetation intercepts rainfall before it reaches the bird directly. Picture a garden hedge in November, the kind that has grown thick and knotted over 15 years, the kind where you cannot see more than a few inches inside. Inside that hedge right now, at this moment, there may be a dozen birds pressed against the central stems, eyes half closed, bodies puffed to maximum volume, waiting. You have walked past that hedge 100 times and never known. But shelter from rain is only the beginning of the story, and it is, in a sense, the least surprising part. Because not all birds disappear into hedges. Some do something that researchers did not fully expect until telemetry technology became small enough to track individual birds through a storm. In a landmark 2017 study published in Movement Ecology, researchers at the University of Southern Denmark fitted European starlings and common blackbirds with sub-miniature GPS loggers and tracked them through 14 separate storm events over 2 breeding seasons. What the data showed overturned a simple assumption that ornithologists had held for decades, that birds in storms are passive, that they simply hide and wait. They do not. At 3 a.m., while you were asleep and the rain fell hardest, the GPS data showed individual blackbirds making targeted movements, not random, not panic, towards specific micro-habitats they had visited before the storm. These were not birds stumbling towards safety. These were birds executing a memorized navigation to a known refuge, in complete darkness, in wind and rain, with accuracy measured in meters. The counterintuitive agent here is memory, not instinct. Recalled spatial memory, functioning at a level of precision that the researchers described as comparable to mammalian landmark navigation. There is a third layer, and it is the one that makes the silence of your yard feel different once you understand it. During a storm, every predator that hunts by sight becomes temporarily less effective. Visibility drops. Sound is masked by rainfall. The ambient noise that a sparrowhawk or a Cooper's hawk relies on to locate prey, the rustling of a bird landing, the soft alarm chip note, disappears into the white noise of falling water. A hunting raptor in rain is a degraded instrument, but here is what that means for the songbird. The storm that endangers it also protects it. And a bird that has chosen deep vegetative cover has chosen a place where a hawk cannot follow at speed. A red-tailed hawk cannot enter a dense interior bramble thicket at hunting velocity. The geometry simply does not permit it. So the bird in the hedge is simultaneously sheltering from the rain and occupying a space that is aerodynamically inaccessible to its primary aerial predators. No evidence of this dual function remains after the storm. The bird emerges. The hawk moves on. Nothing is left. There is a fourth scenario that unfolds at the scale of the storm itself, not the individual bird. When a major storm system approaches, a coastal low, a line of severe thunderstorms, a named tropical system, migrating birds that are airborne over open water or open land can be grounded hundreds of miles from their intended stopover point. This phenomenon, called a fallout, produces concentrations of exhausted birds in coastal scrub, city parks, and suburban gardens that can number in the thousands. A single hedgerow in a coastal county can, in the hours after a major frontal passage, hold more species of warbler than a forest reserve sees in an entire season. And then, within 24 hours, they are gone, refueled, rested, and continuing. You would have had to be standing in the right place at the right hour to see it. Most people never are. So here is where all three answers converge. A bird disappearing from your yard in a rainstorm is simultaneously executing a memorized navigation to structural shelter, benefiting from the predator confusion effect of rainfall, and, in some cases, being joined by hundreds of displaced migrants you will never see because they depart before dawn. The conditions required for you to witness any of these processes directly are, in each case, vanishingly rare. You were right to notice the absence. The absence is the visible edge of something enormous happening just out of sight. And yet none of this is the most surprising thing. The most surprising thing is not what the birds are doing during the storm. It is what the storm reveals about the birds' minds. For most of the 20th century, avian intelligence was framed as a fixed behavioral repertoire, a set of instinctual responses triggered by environmental stimuli. The bird did not choose. The bird responded. That framework has been systematically dismantled by research published across the last 2 decades in journals including Nature, Current Biology, and PLOS ONE. What has replaced it is a picture of cognitive flexibility that, in several documented species, approaches the kind of adaptive problem-solving that researchers previously associated only with primates. The storm is where this shows most clearly, and what follows is the part of the story that most documentaries about birds never reach. In 2019, researchers at the Konrad Lorenz Institute in Austria published findings from a 6-year study on Eurasian jays, Garrulus glandarius, tracking individual behavior before, during, and after storm events. The jays demonstrated pre-storm behavioral shifts beginning up to 4 hours before measurable barometric pressure change would register on standard instruments. They increased food caching. They moved cached items from exposed locations to covered ones, and they did so at a rate that correlated with statistical significance to the eventual severity of the storm rather than simply to the fact of rain. Cornell Lab of Ornithology data from the eBird Citizen Science platform, analyzed in a 2021 paper in the journal Ecology Letters, showed that detection rates for 47 songbird species dropped an average of 68% during storm events, but that pre-storm detection rates showed a measurable spike in the 6 to 12 hours before storm arrival. The birds were more visible before the storm, less visible during it, and returned to baseline after it. The pre-storm spike suggested increased foraging activity, birds loading energy reserves in anticipation of enforced inactivity. A 2022 study from the University of Exeter, tracking great tits with our leg tags through a winter in southwest England, found that individual birds showed consistent, repeatable storm response patterns across multiple events. The same bird chose the same refuge via the same route in successive storms across a full season. The behavior was not random. It was not purely instinctual in the sense of being identical across individuals. Different birds had different strategies, and those strategies, once formed, were stable. What the evidence shows is this. Birds respond to storms not as passive biological machines responding to stimuli, but as individuals with acquired knowledge of their local landscape, with the cognitive capacity to anticipate rather than merely react, and with behavioral flexibility that varies between individuals of the same species. What the evidence does not prove is that birds consciously experience a storm the way you or I might. The gap between measurable anticipatory behavior and subjective experience remains one of the most genuinely unresolved questions in animal cognition research. The honest answer to that question is that we do not know. We have no non-invasive method for measuring the subjective experience of a bird in a storm. What we have is behavior, and the behavior is, by any fair reading, more sophisticated than the old framework predicted. There are also alternative explanations that researchers continue to evaluate. Some of the pre-storm behavioral changes may be responses to infrasound, low-frequency sound waves produced by large storm systems that travel ahead of the weather at frequencies birds can detect and humans cannot. Some of the apparent spatial memory in storm refuging may be better explained by learned landscape features rather than true episodic memory. These distinctions matter, and the science is not settled on them. The open question that no research team has fully answered is this. At what point does a bird storm response cross the threshold from sophisticated instinct into something that deserves a different name? That question is not rhetorical. It is live, contested, and being debated right now in the literature. No one has closed it. So the next time the rain begins and your yard goes quiet, here is the complete truth in two registers. In the practical register, the birds are in the hedge, in the thicket, in the dense interior of the evergreen at the back of your neighbor's garden. They went there by memory, not accident. They are conserving heat, avoiding predators, and waiting for the pressure to rise. They will return. They always return. In the other register, the one that is harder to put down, what you are experiencing when your yard goes silent is the edge of a cognitive world that runs parallel to yours at all times and becomes briefly visible only in its absence. Every time it rains and your birds vanish, something is happening in the interior of those creatures that science is only now finding language for. You were right to notice. The silence was always a signal. You just now know what it was signaling. Where your birds go during a storm is not a mystery that has been kept from you. It is a mystery that was simply too close to see. Tell me in the comments, have you ever seen a bird caught completely in the open during heavy rain, frozen on a branch, or huddled on a fence post, refusing to move? Tell me what species it was, where you saw it, what time of day, and how long it stayed there. I want to build a picture of the exceptions to what this script describes. The moments when the strategy fails, or changes, or does something no one has predicted. I will read every single one.